She never imagined loneliness could exist inside a home she helped build. She never expected to feel abandoned by someone who slept on the same side of the bed every night. She never thought a relationship could look whole from the outside, while slowly emptying her from within. But that's exactly what happened. It didn't start with something dramatic, not with a fight, not with betrayal, not with something she could point to and say, "Here, this is where I lost him." No, it began in the quiet places of everyday life, the kind no one speaks about, the kind she dismissed as normal, as routine. As every marriage goes through this, it began with the mornings. She woke up before everyone else, moving softly through the house so no one would be disturbed. She made breakfast, not because someone asked, but because she wanted to hold the home together in the ways she knew how. She picked up the clothes he left on the floor. Without mentioning it, she folded them because she knew he'd be tired later. She cleaned the kitchen before going to work, because she didn't want anyone coming home to a sink full of dishes. She did the invisible things, the things that don't get applause, the things no one notices unless they stop happening. And she did them with love, at least at the beginning, because in the early years, every effort felt shared. Every task felt mutual. Every detail carried the warmth of two people building a life together instead of one person maintaining a life. The other had grown comfortable inside, but slowly, quietly, imperceptibly, something shifted. Her efforts remained the same, but his presence didn't. He was there, physically, but emotionally. She felt the distance forming, like a crack she couldn't repair. She carried the house. She carried the bills. She carried the appointments. She carried the meals, the laundry, the children's schedules, the emotional climate of the home. But what she carried most heavily was the weight of pretending that this was normal. She told herself he was tired. She told herself he was stressed. She told herself every relationship changes. She told herself she shouldn't complain because he wasn't unfaithful. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't leaving. But how do you explain the kind of loneliness that lives between two people who stopped meeting in the middle? How do you explain missing someone who never actually goes anywhere? How do you explain feeling unseen by the person who looks at you every day but no longer sees you? She cooked his meals. He ate in silence. She planned the days. He went along without noticing. She cleaned the house. He walked through it without gratitude. She carried the marriage. He assumed marriages carried themselves, and every night when she lay beside him, the distance felt wider than the space between their bodies. She felt married, but completely alone. She didn't want luxury. She didn't want grand gestures. She didn't want perfection. She just wanted presence, conversation, connection, partnership. Someone to ask how her day was, and actually listen to the answer. She wanted to feel like she mattered in more ways than the tasks she completed. But the hardest part was not what he didn't do. It was what she stopped feeling. She stopped feeling chosen. She stopped feeling valued. She stopped feeling like his wife, and started feeling like the caretaker of the home and the keeper of emotions. He never offered back. She stayed because she loved him. She stayed because she believed in commitment. She stayed because walking away felt like giving up on everything she had built. But inside, in the quietest part of her soul, she asked herself a question she never dared say aloud. How can I feel this alone while standing right next to the person I promised my life to? This is her story. The story of a woman who gave everything to a marriage that stopped giving back. A story that reflects not failure, but exhaustion. Not bitterness, but heartbreak. not distance, but the ache of being unseen in the very place. She thought she would always belong. And maybe, if you're listening right now, a part of this story feels like your own. It didn't happen all at once. The weight she carried didn't suddenly appear on her shoulders like a crisis or an explosion. It built itself quietly, layer by layer, task by task, day after day, until it became so normal that she no longer recognized it as weight at all. It was just her life. She carried the mornings, the alarms, the children, the lunches, the breakfast no one thanked her for. She carried the afternoons, the errands, the groceries, the planning, the mental list that never ended. She carried the nights, the tired body, the dishes, the laundry, the conversations she initiated, because silence felt too heavy to endure. She carried the emotional climate of the home, keeping the peace, softening the tone, absorbing tension, making sure everyone else was okay, even when she wasn't. She carried the things no one sees, the things no one thinks about, the details that make a life function, but never get acknowledged. And because she had always been capable, everyone assumed she was fine. And because she rarely complained, everyone assumed she didn't need help. And because she took responsibility, everyone assumed it belonged to her. She didn't resent it. Not at first. She loved her family. She loved her home. And she loved the idea that she was building something meaningful. But somewhere along the way, she stopped feeling like a partner and started feeling like a maintenance worker. Someone who keeps the lights on and the floors clean and the schedules running, while the other person simply lives inside the space. She silently sustains. She carried the exhaustion she didn't have time to feel. She carried the disappointment she didn't have space to express. She carried the fear that if she stopped, if she let even one thing fall, everything would collapse, because she knew that she was the one keeping it all together, not emotionally, not financially, not relationally, but practically, functionally, daily, and invisibly. She carried the marriage, not because she wanted control, but because she had no choice. If she didn't do it, no one else would. She carried the solution to every minor problem. She carried the memory of every important date. She carried the mental catalog of what the house needed, what the children needed, what he needed, but no one asked what she needed. And the saddest part? She didn't ask either. She forgot herself, somewhere in the long list of what had to be done. Her life became a sequence of responsibilities, and she convinced herself that this was simply marriage. But deep down, in a place she rarely allowed herself to visit, she felt the truth forming. It wasn't that she was too strong. It was that she had been left alone, in a partnership meant to be shared. And the weight she carried was not a reflection of her capacity, but of his absence. There are wounds that don't come from yelling, fighting, or harsh words, but from the conversations that never happened. She tried. God knows she tried. Not loudly, not angrily, not in a way that demanded anything dramatic. She tried in the soft, calm ways that women try, when they still believe things can be healed. She tried through small questions. How was your day? Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Questions that opened doors he never walked through. She tried through hopeful pauses, those moments when she waited for him to ask about her day, her stress, her heart. But he never asked. He didn't even notice the silence that sat between them at the dinner table. She tried through gentle invitations. Maybe we could spend more time together. Maybe we could go out this weekend. Maybe we could talk about what's been happening. But every invitation fell into the same quiet void, the same place where conversations go, when the other person is present in body, but absent in soul. She tried to express her loneliness, not with accusations, not with blame, but with trembling honesty. And still he didn't hear her. He nodded without listening. He agreed without understanding. He minimized her feelings because he couldn't see the world from the place she stood. And little by little, she stopped opening her heart because she grew tired of handing her vulnerability to someone who didn't know what to do with it. She didn't want perfection. She just wanted connection. A real one, a shared one where two people lean into each other instead of drifting apart one silent night at a time. But every time she reached out, she hit the same wall, his indifference. It wasn't that he didn't speak, it was that his words never touched anything inside her anymore. His answers were brief, shallow, surface level. Not because he didn't care at all, but because he no longer knew how to enter her inner world, and she no longer knew how to invite him in without hurting herself in the process. Their home became a quiet place, not peaceful quiet, but empty quiet, the kind that fills a room when two people live side by side but no longer live together. She carried conversations he wouldn't have. She carried the emotional labor of keeping them connected. She carried every attempt to bring them closer, even as he drifted further. And eventually, she learned the painful truth. You cannot force someone to meet you in the place where intimacy lives. You can reach, you can ask, you can try. But connection cannot be built by one person alone. And the silence she faced was not an accident. It was the reflection of how alone she had been for far longer than she ever wanted to admit. There is a kind of heartbreak that doesn't look like crying. It looks like functioning. It looks like wiping the counter, folding the laundry, packing lunches, answering messages, and keeping life moving, even when your heart is standing still. That was her heartbreak, a heartbreak that lived between the routines she never abandoned and the silence she never spoke about. Every corner of the home carried her fingerprints, the meals she cooked, the clothes she washed, the appointments she remembered, the messes she cleaned, before anyone else even saw them. She held the structure of the household, even while the structure inside her was slowly collapsing. She managed everything: the schedules, the responsibilities, the bills, the needs of everyone else, because she believed that love was measured in how much she could hold. But nothing she held was being held with her. And that was the loneliness that no one saw. She made the bed every morning, even though she hadn't slept well in months. She prepared dinner while listening to the same short responses from a man who once knew how to look into her eyes. She cleaned spaces where her presence felt invisible. She created a home where her heart had no place to rest. And she did it all with a kind of quiet dignity that others mistook for strength. They praised her for being dependable, for being stable, for being the one who always keeps things together. No one realized that the thing she kept together was everyone else's life, not her own. No one realized that she wasn't okay because she didn't fall apart loudly. She fell apart in the moments where no one would notice. She fell apart while loading the dishwasher, holding back tears so she wouldn't have to explain them. She fell apart while folding clothes, wondering how a partnership could feel so one-sided. Inside a marriage built for two, she fell apart while grocery shopping, pushing a cart under bright lights, while feeling completely unseen. She fell apart in the car, in the shower, in the bathroom with the door locked, the only places she could cry without interruption. She poured herself into the home because the home was the only thing she still knew how to care for. But the truth she didn't want to face was this: she maintained everything except herself. Her heart was bruised from neglect, exhausted from overgiving, and starving for connection, in a place where love should have lived freely. And yet, she kept going, day after day, task after task, not because she was unbreakable, but because she didn't know how to stop caring for the life she built, even while that life was slowly draining the woman inside it. It didn't hit her in the middle of a fight. It didn't happen after a dramatic argument. It didn't come from a sudden betrayal or a moment of shock. It came quietly, like most truths that hurt the deepest. It was a moment so ordinary that she almost missed it. Maybe she was washing dishes while he sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, the way he always did. Maybe she was folding laundry while he walked past her, without noticing the exhaustion in her eyes. Maybe she was sitting beside him in bed, trying to start a conversation. That fell flat after 3 words. Or maybe it was simply the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that exposes how far 2 people have drifted while living under the same roof. And then it happened. That quiet, devastating clarity. A thought so simple and yet so painful that it pulled the breath from her chest. I've been alone for a long time, even while being married. It wasn't a realization about him. It was a realization about her, about how long she'd been carrying emotions he hadn't noticed, about how long she'd been trying to save a connection he didn't realize was fading, about how long she'd been screaming in a silence only she could hear. She looked around her life, the home she maintained, the marriage she protected, the routines she honored, and she saw something she had never allowed herself to see. She had been giving love to someone who only accepted it, without offering any in return, not intentionally, not cruelly, just carelessly. He had grown comfortable, taking her presence for granted, mistaking her strength for invincibility, confusing her silence with satisfaction, and she had grown accustomed to carrying the weight alone. She didn't blame him, not fully, because somewhere along the way, she stopped asking for love. The moment she believed she was asking for too much. She stopped expecting connection. The moment he offered her routine instead, she stopped voicing her loneliness. The moment she realized he didn't know what to do with her vulnerability, she stopped hoping for more. The moment she accepted less. This was the moment that broke her, but it was also the moment that awakened her. She finally saw that the sadness she felt was not from a recent distance, but from years of unshared emotional labor, years of conversations she began and ended alone, years of trying to hold together a bond only she was nurturing, years of hoping he would eventually notice. The woman who slept beside him. The truth wasn't that the marriage had suddenly become empty. The truth was that the emptiness had been growing quietly for years while she hid her hurt behind responsibilities, routine, and resilience. And when that truth finally surfaced, it didn't come with anger. It came with grief. A grief she had swallowed for too long. A grief she no longer wanted to pretend wasn't real. Because the moment she realized she had been alone for years was also the moment she finally began to find herself again. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she stops waiting to be noticed, not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of a quiet, painful clarity that whispers to her soul, I deserve to exist in my own life again. For her, that moment arrived, not in the middle of an argument, not during a breakdown, but in one of those silent evenings that look ordinary to everyone else. She was standing in the kitchen, still doing the work she had always done, cleaning, putting things away, resetting the home for tomorrow. He walked past her, eyes on something else, mind somewhere else, heart unreachable as always. And she realized something. She could disappear for an entire day, and nothing here would change. Not the noise, not the routine, not the schedule, not the emotional distance, because she had taught everyone around her that she required nothing, not attention, not affection, not care, not love. as long as she kept everything running. In that moment, she felt the weight of every unnoticed gesture and every unreciprocated effort settle onto her shoulders, but she didn't break. For the first time, she didn't cry quietly in the bathroom or swallow the pain and keep moving. She stood there, still, steady, breathing deeply, and let the truth wash over her. She had been living unseen, inside the very life she built, and she didn't want to live like that anymore. Something inside her shifted, not a sharp snap, but a slow, sacred turning back toward herself. She didn't slam doors. She didn't make threats. She didn't demand change from a man who no longer knew how to meet her halfway. Instead, she changed the one thing she still had control over: herself. She began speaking up in a voice that no longer apologized for needing to be heard. She began setting boundaries around the emotional labor that had drained her for years. She began taking care of herself in ways she once reserved only for others. She began choosing rest instead of constant responsibility. She began reconnecting with the woman she was before she became the one who held everyone else together. And something unexpected happened. As she pulled her attention away from carrying the entire marriage alone, she created space for him to finally see the weight she had held. Some men wake up when the woman stops disappearing into duty. Some do not. But she learned something far more important. Her worth was never tied to how much she carried. Her value was never measured by how invisible she could make her own needs. Her dignity did not depend on someone else's ability to see her clearly. The day she stopped living unseen was not the day she abandoned her marriage. It was the day she stopped abandoning herself. And that single moment of inward return became the quiet beginning of a life where she no longer had to shrink to keep peace, no longer had to break to keep love, no longer had to disappear to belong, because for the first time in years, she finally chose the one person who had been missing from her life: herself.